So, what got you into comics? You, for whatever reason, decided to pick up a comic book. You got hooked from the characters, from the story, from the, something fun to pass the time. Why did you fully get into comics? It's an interesting question, and I'd be curious to learn your reasons. But let's talk about mine. Hey, everybody, this is Perch. That sounds so douchey. Let's talk. What are your reasons? But let's talk about mine. My reasons. I don't know. I'm overthinking it. I've got neurotic behavior that would make Seinfeld look like nothing. Anyway, everybody comes to comics from a different place. And I've talked a little bit about this in the past about how you first started getting into comics. And for me, it was from a number of different sources, kind of all at once. I remember being interested in things as a kid, certainly Star Wars and wanted as much as you could. If you were a kid in the '70s, late '70s, you were excited. You wanted the toys, you wanted the shirts, you wanted the candy with the branding on it. I mean, you were all in on the merchandising, and the comics were cool. And I remember that first thought as a kid of, holy cow, the comics are telling new stories. And I think that's a really important one because even very, very young, it was exciting to me to get the idea that this universe that with all other things or with most other things was confined. That once the movie was over, once the lights came back on in the theater, the show was over. There wasn't more story. The rest of the story would have to take place in your head. And don't get me wrong, I had an amazing imagination. I would go into all the different scenarios of what could be. But when I learned that not only were there were more stories to be told, it was like I had just seen the tip of the iceberg, and underneath the water, there's this huge, huge mass of characters and stories and ideas and other things. Because for me, it wasn't, and I heard this recently that part of as a negative to an expanded universe or to comics or things like that, the negative was that it taught kids not to use their imagination. That instead of dreaming up the ideas themselves, they would just kind of rely on others and let other people do their dreaming for them. And I just found that ridiculous as a concept. I think you do your dreaming. It can take many different forms, and the idea that you could see every new character, every new setting, every new planet, every new tension that was introduced through the comics was an example of just more ways to go. So, like a lot of people, Star Wars was my quote unquote gateway drug into comics. And then you got G.I. Joe and a lot of other stuff. But so that was one entry point. Another was one that I think doesn't exist as much anymore, and that's the library. Now, you hear about that all the time. I hear people talking about how great the library is. Library is great, don't get me wrong. But it's not, it's very different from what it was back in the '80s or so, where I could go to the library. I remember seeing the Fantastic Four collections there, tons of comics, the Dark Phoenix saga, a lot of these graphic novels there that collected a bunch of comics, and you'd sit down and you'd read like 20 comics in one sitting at the library. And that was, yet another world. That's where I got introduced to characters for the first time, not things like Star Wars, where I had some idea outside and then came to comics to learn more. The idea that the Fantastic Four and Superman and the Flash and Green Lantern, all these characters, I'm able to read those. And of course, when you see them years later in the Justice League of America cartoon or the Super Friends, what was I can't believe I'm forgetting that now. I can remember the theme song in my head. Anyway. What was with those two, like the brother and sister and the dog? The Wonder Twins were goofy, but the brother and sister and the dog was really goofy. Anyway, so I think that I remember, finally, once I was hooked with comics, going to the newsstand, going to the grocery store with my parents, and while they're off getting food so we could survive, I was, seated on what's probably a filthy floor and just reading the comics. And I remember my mom, it's like I was excited when she would need like a half an hour in the grocery store to really do all these things. And it's funny now because at least, my life, I have kids now. I go to the grocery store, and for me, it's like get in, get out as fast as humanly possible. And there is no newsstand, so the kids are traipsing up and down the aisle with me, and I'm like, no, you can't buy that ice cream. No, 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 we're not going to buy super chocolate, super frosted chocolate. I wish there was a newsstand. I'd be like, hey, go sit over there and read comics, and I'll be back for you. But I mean, imagine in 2020, kind of this idea that as a parent, you can kind of dump the kid off in this section of the store unattended, and they would just entertain themselves with comics while you would, wander the aisles, getting your groceries, and just hope your kid is there at the end. But that location introduced me to all kinds of books, because the longer my mom took, the more I would, just basically I would finish the comics I was kind of excited to read. You ever done this? Older people will remember this. At the newsstand, you had a lot of everything, and so you would kind of pick out, oh, here are 6 comics I want to read first, and then you would, behind that, you'd have the, you know, it's like, all right, well, I guess I'm, moving on to this issue of the Avengers, and every now and then you'd be really surprised in a good way, because you weren't, you were excited because you're going in to read the X-Men, and then you got through the X-Men, you get to the Avengers, and you weren't really excited about that, but then you're like, holy cow, this comic is amazing. I realized, I remember liking the Fantastic Four, and then kind of not for a while. It wasn't interesting to me, and then I remember picking up John Byrne's Fantastic Four in a grocery store at one point, and I'm like, I guess I'll read the Fantastic Four. I got nothing else to do. And it's like, oh my God, this comic is cool. What are they doing to Sue Storm? This is great. And then suddenly you're hooked. And I mean, the amount of times you'd certainly read, like it's a free library there at the grocery store. Probably not the best thing in the world. Comics shop would cringe at that. I always cringe when people come in and just read. But the amount of comics I would then take out, you'd like, here are the 3 that I want to read again and again and again. You'd walk out of the store with those, and it started a life. And in your head as a kid, you just came to expect that this is what you're going to do. If you went to the grocery store, you're walking out of there with 3 to 5 comics, and that's just what's going to happen. That was cool. That was the good old days. And then I think the other last kind of entry point that I'll throw out here is manga. So manga came from a very different place for me, where I think my story, probably everything I've said up till now, a lot of you can relate to. That was your story as well. With manga, it was a little different. Manga, I would be traveling to other countries, and I would, I need something to do. So I'm looking for the equivalent, and I don't know Japanese at that point, so I can't read what's there, but I still want comics, or I still want something to do, something to entertain myself. And this was before like the handheld gaming was really, super going. Game Boy, that kind of stuff, slowly rolling out. But there weren't that many like games in Japan that you couldn't get in the U.S., so the appeal was not as much there. You go to another country, you get something new. But comics were. You go in like, hey, here's a giant collection of comics that who ever heard of this stuff? And so I remember kind of, just picking up stuff, even though I couldn't read it, thinking, well, it's a comic book, at least I'll be able to follow the action along. And I and a lot of other people have this story. This is how we learned a lot of Japanese, by reading these comics. And, you want to know what's going on. You get a comic you really, really like, so you'll go and kind of hunt down the translations, and you work your way through it. And pretty soon you start to recognize characters, and that becomes a way to actually learn the language, or at least how to recognize bits of it. The other thing that I think is probably a little bit more common for people in the West is that, you're looking for something to entertain yourself. And in the late 80s, early 90s, you're getting movies, you're getting anime. And I remember getting, this was kind of my introduction to Rumiko Takahashi, was through Lum, and I always just call it Lum. I know the I can never pronounce, even though I can speak very limited Japanese, I can never it does not roll off the tongue. See, this is the problem. A lot of you have noticed that my pronunciation of things are really weird. It's because in my brain somewhere, it's trying to get multiple languages and mash them together as I start talking. The longer I talk, the lazier my brain and my mouth gets, and then I start just merging these syllables together, and it comes out, like a bastardized bit of insanity. But you watch these. I remember watching Rumiko Takahashi stuff and looking up Ranma One Half and some of these, and then going and finding Maison Ayokoko and One Pound Gospel and some of these books, and getting very excited about that. And then Shonen Jump would come along soon after, and it just these are great things. So even when I got a lot older and I'm in the got jobs in the corporate world, and I would go to Japan, and other people are like they're looking for pearl necklaces and they're looking for the expensive jewelry to take back to their significant other. I'm like, how many copies of Shonen Jump can I cram in this luggage? Because if you travel over to Japan on business, one of the things, if you're a very tidy traveler, you're somebody who can do it, you get kind of a large size carry on, and that's what you're going to live in for the week. And you can get your suit and your shirts in there, and you can fold up nice and efficient. This doesn't work, of course, if you're traveling with others, but for me, guy traveling over to Japan, yeah, it works. So got my carry-on, and there's always this. I need to leave a little bit of space because I'm going to have like 3 phone books of comic books that is Shonen Jump that's going to need to come back with me, as well as whatever I've blown at the pachinko. well, you're not technically supposed to take any of that stuff with you. Anyway, all right, I'll reminisce enough. How did you get into comics? What was your entry into comics? Leave me a comment below. Would love to hear your stories, your thoughts. It's always cool to see all that. And I guess the other piece is almost everything I've said in this video is now gone. That's the crazy part. The newsstand is gone. A lot of the libraries still exist, but a lot of them have gotten rid of kind of the classic books, and instead they have graphic novels from the last 10 years. And you don't have the classic stuff anymore in many cases. The ability to travel over and get some of this stuff is also largely gone. I mean, you have Shonen Jump on mobile and other things that I've talked about. But a lot of these elements are not with us anymore. And I think that's why perhaps in some of these videos I sound a little nostalgic, or why I'm really struggling to figure out what's going to take its place, what's going to come in to be the next thing, and how can we get there. That's all part of the story. Anyway, let me know your comments below, your stories, how you got into comics. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notification if you don't mind. Introduce to a friend, that would be really pleasant. Follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch. I'm on Facebook too. Whatever your ideology or who you hate today, I'm on both platforms. That works. And most importantly, thanks for listening.